AI in the travel, here we go. Got that AI on the low, taking flights to and fro, booking trips in a snap with a simple chatbot flow. AI, revolutionizing how we roll. Gonna hop on a plane.
Welcome to another episode of the Everything AI in Travel podcast, where we hear from the makers, shapers, and buyers of AI technology in the travel space. Here's your host, Tony Khan.
Hey everyone. Now, before we get started with today's show, I've got a very special guest with me who's got an event coming up later in the year that I think you should consider attending. Welcome to the show, Mr. Bruce Rassard from Arrival. How are you going?
Hey, thanks, Tony. Really appreciate the time. So Arrival, for those who aren't familiar with us, focuses on destination experiences, what you do when you get there on vacation. We all know that people don't go on trips to stay in a hotel or fly. They go to have fun when they get to destination. So that's what Arrival is all about. At our conference this year in Washington, D.C., September 29 to October 3rd, we actually have three different elements. First, we have our executive summit for the C-suite. Then the second day is our AI forum for destination experiences. It's the first of its kind. It's never happened. And we've got a great group of speakers that are going to be there to talk about the intermediate up to expert level of what people know about AI, not designed for beginners. We will have some sessions at Arrival 360, which follows the AI forum for more introductory AI.
Sounds really great, Bruce. Now, what can people expect to take away or learn from going to the AI specific part of the conference?
You know, at the AI conference, Tony, we're going to have high-level strategic discussions on our main stage, everything from agents and what's happening with that, the impact of AI on search and discovery, what you need to know from a regulatory and privacy perspective. That'll be on the main stage and more sessions like that. Some investors will be there sharing their perspective. And then we'll have breakout sessions where we're going to go deep again into search and discovery because we know how important that is. Agents, working with agents, and roll up your sleeves, bring your laptop, hour and a half long sessions on the tools. You know, we know what tools everyone's using today. By the time the event runs around in September, it'll be different. And we'll have roundtables with discussions for practical information. Here's some tools you need to start using today. By tomorrow, you can start using them.
Sounds super fantastic. I'm definitely going to be there. Where can people find out some more information?
Just go to arrival.travel and navigate your way to our Washington event. And you'll see subtitles for our executive summit and our AI forum and the rest of the conference that's going on that first week of October in DC.
Perfect. Now, there's a special offer for listeners of the Everything AI and Travel podcast, and you'll find that in the show notes. So if that sounded like something that you would like to attend, and I think you should, then go down to those show notes and grab that special offer, find out more about the conference and book yourself a ticket. Thanks for joining us today, Bruce.
Yeah, one last thing. It's Arrival with one R. For those of you listening, arrival.travel.
Perfect. Thanks for joining us, Bruce. And now on with the show. Hey there. Welcome to another episode of the Everything AI in Travel podcast. And today we're going to talk all about open source in travel, open source in AI. And I asked around who would be the perfect person to talk to about this subject. And the same name kept coming up, and luckily I've got him with me here today. Welcome to the show, Stu Waldron. How are you going?
Good morning for you. Good evening for me. Hello, everybody.
Yeah, welcome to the show. Now, your background is as a technologist and as a proud promoter of the open source model. Your background includes time with IBM and as a very significant player in Travelport. Tell us kind of a little bit about your background and kind of how you fell into technology and then how you fell into travel as part of that journey.
I actually started with Eastern Airlines in Miami in 1977. So I've been doing this a while and kind of been all through the evolutions of technology and travel ever since. Something technology I always wanted to do. Actually, when I was going to go to college, I wanted to be a veterinarian, but life had other decisions for me. So working for an airline was great. So I started at Eastern Airlines and did that for a while, and then ended up moving to Denver and worked for United Airlines for a while. Then ended up moving to Tulsa, Oklahoma, and worked for American Airlines for a while. You kind of see a pattern here.
Done the rounds of all the airlines.
But in all of that, also developing some of the newer systems of the time. And then some of the fun part was at some point, the Channel Tunnel project started, and they needed to compete with the type of reservations and capabilities and revenue management the airlines had. So they all made a big deal that they were going to take a copy of the American Airlines system and take it to Paris and try to convert it to rail use. And so I ended up going over to France for 4 years to lead the systems part and help set up the data center and everything for something new and different in rail.
That sounds like an
Uh,
amazing opportunity. I hope you made the most of your time over there.
Did a lot of traveling. My kids went to the American School of Paris, learned to love rugby and cricket and do some other things. Converting from air to rail turned out to be a lot harder than anybody thought. Most airplanes leave an airport and go at the next one in one piece. Thank you very much. Good for us all.
Yeah.
Rail doesn't. In the middle of nowhere, 5 cars will go one way, 4 cars will go the other way. And so when you try to do inventory management and all those controls, everything is like, this is infinitely harder. And maybe an airline would make 3 stops in your journey. A typical train in Europe could make up to 99. It's like, so anybody who says, oh, rail is easy compared to air, no, it's not.
Wrong.
So we got that running and then came back and ended up in Texas for a while and then ended up at IBM in New York for a while, going all over the world. I worked with the Ministry of Rail in China, the Ministry of Rail in India, the Ministry of Aviation in China, down to Qantas quite a lot,
Yeah.
down there. So all over the place doing hotels and things like that. And then I ended up on a contract in DC for Amtrak for a while and then ended up at Travelport and it was like one of my last stops and kind of made this big old loop around the world to end up back in Florida where I started anyway.
There you go. There you go. And dived yourself into the GDS world. And that's kind of where some sort of standardization happened. But like that wouldn't be considered open source because there were competing players all using different systems. And I do some work today with some travel agencies here in Australia that are still using all 3 different of the major GDSs. And so they have to learn all the different languages and all the different ways that it works. And it's very confusing. But what was it about that journey through technology that kind of drove you towards an open source mindset? Presumably it's just like, having to start over again with each new connection that you want to make and then do it in a different way to understand the information that you're receiving is just painful and annoying and probably boring.
Oh, absolutely. The concept around open source that's now been around some long time is why would everybody build something individually that is non-competitive? How the basic things work, it's not a competitive advantage for how do you construct a message and send it. It's just not attractive to your customer. Don't know, they don't care. So this started with various systems capabilities. Where this sort of started with airlines that was unique was the original reservation system that was created in conjunction with IBM and went live in 1972. We still count that day. There's actually a funny counter in the systems that started counting systems from that initial day to figure out time zones all over the world. You don't want to travel the day that counter rolls over. Forget Y2K. This one's going to be much worse. But IBM ended up with a copy of keeping the copy of the operating system that was all created together, which, by the way, was based off the SAGE missile guidance system.
Wow.
Needed a near real-time system to do this, and that's what IBM had just finished for the US military. Why not just borrow it?
Yeah.
And then the actual application was written, and at that point, IBM wasn't interested in software, so they gave it away with every mainframe sale. So the airlines all quickly adopted that. So even before we had the concept of open source, everybody was pretty much running the same system and getting together sometimes several times a year, at least once a year, to just trade. Just say, hey, I fixed this problem and I added this capability. And somebody says, oh, great. Well, I fixed this other thing. And they would just trade code and everybody, because how you actually ran the reservation system was not a competitive advantage.
Yeah, I find that interesting because the businesses are competitive, right? And so how do those conversations come about? And is it the technologists, the people who are actually feeling the immense pain of having to work through all these bugs and different ways of working that drive those conversations? Part
I
of
guess I'm saying would be if you are an engineer, that means pain when you're talking to product people. But there was a more fundamental reason of it. In the first couple of decades of the boom in air travel, everything was regulated. So you had to get a government approval, whether the Australian government or the US or UK or anything. You couldn't just fly anywhere you wanted, and the fares were set. So in that environment, it even made sense to the business people. Well, why would I want to build this on my own? Plus, we still had to interline, even in those early days, that I have to accept a Qantas ticket to connect to an American flight and so on. So there was good business reasons for a fair amount of cooperation. Deregulation finally hit in the 80s, and yeah, a lot of that cooperation fell apart. But to answer your question, early on, it made actually business sense. It wasn't necessarily a technology driver. Then people got ideas in their heads that I can put some bells and whistles into my messages that somehow is going to get me advantage. So where we've ended up after that is a fair amount of chaos, to which you've already alluded to, that if I send, the most common message used in the industry, airline or otherwise, is the availability message, which just basically says what flights or what trains or what hotel rooms are available on this date under these conditions. At a GDS, where you have to talk to everybody, I ran the architecture team. I was the VP of architecture. We had 5,000 those types of messages to deal with, all basically doing the same thing, no two alike, which meant specialized code for each and every one of them. And this went on through all kinds of things. The original message format was called P1024B. Engineers, we have no imagination. And then we went on to EDIFACT and other things. So getting near Y2K, everybody wanted to move off of EDIFACT and move on to XML. And in a brief period of clarity and sanity, the whole industry, hotels and airlines, got together and said, well, if we all just make this up on our own, this is going to be really chaotic. So they formed the Open Travel Alliance and said, let's combine our resources, let's define the messages, because that will save us money and probably make it easier for everybody to talk to everybody else. So since year 2000, we've been publishing messages for just about anything you can imagine in an XML format, and more recently in something more convenient for Java and JSON. But that was the original idea, was to stop driving each other crazy and agree on some messages. Still, it helped quite a lot, but a lot of people still took the messages and modified the hell out of them,
Yeah,
which leads to where we are today.
for sure. And so we're talking like this is 25 years ago, and some of these other details back in the 80s, which is 40 years ago. Like, are we making progress here? Like, is it really working? And the other question I kind of that pops into my head all the time around open source is like, this stuff costs money. Like, people taking their time to, build these standards and maintain them and update them and all that. Like, who pays? Who pays? Who earns? Is it all the major companies putting money in a pot via a foundation, or like how does it actually work in practice?
This particular nonprofit, the Open Travel Alliance, has membership dues, and so various companies join, and that pays to keep the lights on. It's a nonprofit, funds a few headcount to keep the website running, keep the databases running, do stuff like that. Most of the message work is done as work groups with volunteers. So there's a lot going on in the hotel side right now for revenue accounting or revenue management. And there's various revenue management companies, but also some of the big hotel chains and others involved. And they just have their people put their time. So we meet weekly and argue about should this bit be over here or should this bit be over there and what to do. But the financial justification is easy because the manpower and labor spent to write custom code for everything you need to talk to far outsees the manpower cost of telling people to attend a work group and try to get this down. So anything we can agree to and get everybody to reuse is a direct line to cost takeout for the companies. is just less code. If they could only write the code that's going to do all these messages, do it once, and it works for everybody, they think they died and gone to heaven.
Yeah.
If we can get to that standard, because again, the format of the message is just not a competitive advantage.
Yeah, for sure. And like as part of Everything AI and Travel newsletter and podcast, one of the other things I did at the very beginning of my journey was start a Slack group. And the people who joined that Slack group were mainly, particularly in the first 6 months, people who were technologists who were interested in this new technology of AI and were getting in there and starting to build stuff. And so I know within our group we've got some people that are vermin advocates of open source, and they are volunteers in these groups, and it's a incredibly admirable effort. Like, what's the motivation for someone to volunteer into a group like this? Like, I know, for example, we've got some in our group that are working on the digital ID standards for Europe at the moment, for example, and they're off once a week, 2 hours, whatever, of their valuable time, because they're also startup founders, etc., building these things. Like, what drives that motivation, do you think?
It's kind of an interesting question, because I think that'll be different for different people. People with an engineering mindset really do have a concept about how things should be done. And an engineering mindset says there's patterns to follow to do things, let's say, the right way. I mean, we often end up telling management and product people, oh, you're not giving us the time to do it right, but I'm telling you, you're going to have to spend the time and labor to do it over if you you keep doing it the way you're doing it. So you can ask any engineer, and that's just really one of their hot buttons. You don't give me the time to do it right the first time, you're just going to end up paying me to do it over. So for a lot of them, the idea to get in the open source stuff is, well, this is their chance. It's something that a lot of people are going to adopt and do it one way in a consistent way. And damn it, it's going to be done the right way. So a lot of that is just the engineering mindset. And these groups are fun. We do end up arguing over bits and bytes and this, that, and the other thing. But it really allows people to get into their comfort zone to say, that's where I'm actually comfortable arguing about.
Yeah.
And so, a lot of people are drawn to it if just given the time. So I quickly plug something I try to get other industry leaders to understand: to let your engineers loose. Don't give your engineers 40 to 50 hours of work and then expect them to spend their nights and weekends supporting an effort like this. I ran a large engineering architecture team, and I would say 10% of their time, show me what you're going to do that helps the community. Go code something, go do something open source, because ultimately that'll save the company I worked for money, and it just moves the ball forward. So that's the one thing I'd also try to get out there is business leaders just understand that there's a bottom line value to this, and it'll happen a lot faster if you just get some of these engineers that are so passionate about it. Just give them a little time.
Yeah, I love it. And I love it that people find their tribe and, and find the area where they can speak up and use their expertise in a way that's respected and understood and debated, and, and they can get into those conversations. And I've worked for companies that, have volunteer as part of their, part of the workforce process. Is like, we want you to volunteer, 40 days a week or whatever it happens to be. And it's generally architected towards philanthropic, endeavors. And I'd never really thought about it in terms of open source. And, I think the technologists within those businesses would be, jump at the bit to take some of that volunteer time and go and do open source work. And, maybe if that's how your company is, if you're listening, works today and you're the CEO, maybe that's something you can think about and talk to your technology team about if you do have those volunteer programs, is to open up some time for these people to get out there and do some open source work. Now, my background in travel is from the tours and activities industry, which is kind of one of the last ones to come online. We should have had all these learnings from the airlines and hotels down the track. And the business I led, Urban Adventures, we built our product with a native API from birth. We thought this was going to be our competitive advantage. And I think maybe 1 year into our existence, organization called Octo.
Very familiar with them.
There you go. It kind of grew up and still goes this day. And actually, this year more than ever, seems to be gaining more momentum.
And they're repeating the same old mistakes, unfortunately.
There you go. Why does it take so long for people to come on board with these standards, to understand that it's better for everyone if we just do it this way. And what are some of the reasons why it seems the larger companies, the incumbents, hold out from joining the standards? Is it because they've like spent the time already cobbling together everybody's, native API, and, they've put 10 years of work into it, and they feel like they're just giving everyone else a leg up, in an instant, should they, succumb to the open standards? Is that kind of how it works, or have I got
Yes,
that?
but let me even back up a little bit to Octo, because I've talked to the gentleman that actually done most of the messages. What I've tried to caution him on is other travel companies would dearly love to pick up tours and easily integrate it into their hotel offerings, everything. But they've gone off to create their own version. So they're defining the customer their own way. They're defining payment their own way. They're defining things. So they're just making it more difficult and expensive for anybody to pick this up. So I'm going to keep banging on them to say, as we do this bigger open travel stuff, if you put it in our libraries and our models with everything else, there's one definition for what a customer, guest, passenger, just what it means. Contact, the boring stuff, the contact information, methods, forms of payment, and everything. Those are wheels that just don't need to be reinvented. So the Octo team, and there's a restaurant technology network doing the same thing, unfortunately reinventing the wheel more than they really need to. So that's a maturity thing to say, oh, we just got to do this for us, not realizing, well, who do you want to sell your stuff to? The people that have all these other standards, and you're asking them to adopt yet a different standard to talk to you. Probably not your best plan. But then to answer your question, there are major players in certain sectors that really look at, if my message is different, there's a barrier for you to leave me. And for the other, and that means a barrier to entry to go to another GDS or another airline, everything else. So unfortunately, that's the mindset of most product people, certainly not all, but most product people, that says really negatively, in a negative view, is like, yes, I'm glad my messages are different because that makes it difficult for people to migrate away from me. Big vendors of other technology would always do the same thing too. You'd have to learn a new language or whatever. I want to create barriers for you to leave. What it's hard to get the argument with them is, you're creating barriers for somebody to come to you. It works both ways.
Yeah.
And that's changing the mindset about looking at open source, that if it's something non-competitive about how your product information gets from point A to point B, all you're creating, every barrier you put up to somebody leaving is a barrier to somebody up joining you. So tends to be that any ones who've gotten market dominance, that's really enforced because they've already got market dominance and they want to keep it that way. It's generally the ones trying to catch up will more happily embrace open source because they purposely want to make it easier for people to adopt their product. But unfortunately, there's certain protective mindsets out there.
Yeah, I can definitely see how that kind of evolves. Now, the entire industry is going through a state of flux with AI rolling out, and in the platform world of AI, there's already like a lot of talk around open source versus non-open source. You see it just in the general discourse around, well, the Meta platform is open source, or DeepSeek is open source, and the others are closed source. And then we're seeing like protocols come out, like MCP, for example, which seem to be universally adopted, like at the first mention, I can't
Rather
remember.
rudimentary at this point, but yes.
Yeah, for sure. But like, is that because the people that are behind these major platforms are more mature in their evolution of way they've built technology in the past, that they're like, oh yeah, that works, that's good, let's build on that. I don't need to compete, I don't need to build my own standard over here and say this is the open source one and this is the open source one over here, and they're different. Like, what is it that allows those protocols to be picked up so easily, and yet in more mature industries, it's like it's a much more difficult thing.
First, let me suggest, even in more mature industries, there's maybe more going on that's generally visible to people. Because what's visible to most people is what you as the user would see doing an LLM or various things to search on things, and now getting your head around a conversational way to search for things. But for example, in the travel industry, been using AI, AI and ML for decades. So, for example, in the airline industry, because of the past, these fares that had to be even actually conveyed to each other in a book. If you remember ever traveling and ever had a difficult itinerary and somebody told you on the phone, oh, we got to give that to a fare desk. There literally was a fare desk. And just think of a banquet table with one long book opened on it. That's how complicated the fares are. So even today, since they don't tend to get rid of old fares, they just keep adding new fare definitions. Any given city pair in the world has over 100,000 valid fares to it. Now, of which most people only calculate 100 of them. Well, even 15, 20 years ago, we were using machine language to figure that out. Which are the fares that are likely to anybody's going to buy, so I don't waste all this time calculating fares nobody's ever going to pick. Because when there's 100,000 fares, that's a hell of a lot of processing for each and every flight. So a lot of ML has been used in travel, but mostly behind the scenes for labor efficiency, scheduling efficiency, other things. It's only just now beginning to show up more and more in what you'd see the retailing side and the more visible side. And it's caused a lot of head scratching right now because there's a big shift in traffic away from search engines like Google, chat GBT and other things that are becoming new types of travel channels. And nobody really, it's the Wild West. Nobody's really figured out how this is exactly going to work. So that's a lot of the talk right now because this is what's becoming visible to people. But there still is a fundamental issue in travel, and it kind of goes back to everything we talked about at this point. The APIs and the available data is just absolute chaos. So when you talk about syntax and semantics, it's all over the place. So the various AI type things, ML things, my architecture team and I, would take care of, 60 to 70% of the labor was data cleansing, actually coming up with the models, because often there was off-the-shelf models from some of the big IT companies anyway that would generally do what you needed to do. The data was so bad. And so even as we move into the LLM world, talk about hallucinations. Holy crap. I mean, some of this data it's going to get from the various data sources today, stale caches, all kinds of problems. That's the other talk that's going on right now to say, can I just throw machine learning and LLM at the problem and say, you figure out what if this is actually real or bookable or anything else? It's like, well, no, it's still a big pile of bad data. So while a lot of people are racing to say, what does this mean to the retail side and my relationship with the customer, a lot of us are in the background saying, but the data's crap. What is the model going to do with it? But the data's just absolute crap.
Yeah. I see people like Timothy O'Neill Dunn talking about this all the time. Like pretty much every post he makes is about just like the ball of spaghetti that is the data. And I think you've kind of explained it very well there by saying that there's potentially 100,000 fares that the LLM could, find its way to, and then like it might go down the rabbit hole of like trying to find the exact best one for this particular query and bring it back. But it might be a stale fare, as you say. It might not be actually bookable and whatever. It still might be true to some point in the fact that it lives within this data set, but it's totally impractical for the end user. And I'd not really drawn those dots together. Like I hear the talk about the bad data, but I've never really kind of been able to conceptualize it in my mind, which kind of preempts my next question, which was like, is the AI revolution that we're going through a big opportunity for open source to do a big cleansing here, or it's actually up to each company or the open source standards themselves to go and cleanse this data as part of its process to actually make it all work properly?
I think for most of the big players that I see out there and the ones I do get to talk to and others, it is certainly an inflection point. As I kind of mentioned before, this already shift in customer traffic is scaring the crap out of some of the big companies. And that can be useful because before, when they're a previous discussion, somewhat protective of there's the right way, the wrong way, and the Marriott way, or the Qantas way, or whatever, they're beginning to figure out, oh shit. that this is all changing. I'm not prepared for it. The legacy systems I have, oh, by the way, GDPR is also scaring the shit out of everybody because it's very hard to actually do that correctly and stay out of GDPR jail, which was one of my principal things as a VP of architecture, stay out of GDPR jail. So we're hoping it causes them to take 2 steps back and listen to people like from Open Travel. We're trying to expand the scope to the foundation and pull in the Digital Identity Foundation, Open Wallet, and other things, and advocating. There's some things to pull in about how offers and orders work, but we're going to have to go truly REST, the type of JSON REST type things where it's truly a connectionless architecture, and do other technology changes that get them to understand all these things you want to move to are predicated on the cloud native technologies of today, which is a shared nothing architecture. There's no such thing as a backend database that constantly has to be updated. I'm sorry, that was great in the 70s. I helped build them, but it's just not the cool thing today. So we're finally making some inroads to them saying some long put off changes in the way you look at the marketplace needs to change. And if we have the time, I'll even explain a little bit what the fundamental shift in their minds has to be.
Please.
Availability we talked about. Think of it as a pull model. The whole conversation that you want to buy a trip or a hotel room or a ferry booking or anything starts with you asking a series of questions, rather rudimentary ones. What time do these flights leave? When do they go here? Is there a room at this particular date on this particular hotel? You're putting it together yourself. You're manually assembling the pieces because it's in a pull model. I don't know anything till I actually go ask the question, and I end up asking pretty specific questions, flights on this day or this week and everything, and you're just pulling in the data and having to basically collate itself. Compare that with digital retail anywhere else. It's like, no, I want this type of product that does this type of thing. Show me what you got. And boom, you got a list of products and they're actionable. You click on it and you're done. If you Google something today, or even use an LLM that say, I want to go in Santorini, I want to go someplace in Greece and do this, you'll get a whole list of options, but then you still have to go something different to actually book it. So what we're advocating is we got to turn the whole thing on its head and go into a publish model. If you happen to own a tour company, what you should be able to do is put up, these are the type of tours I have, this is my schedule, these are my rates, and here's my business terms and conditions, including would be if I'll give a group discount or do anything. You should be able to list that, and like publishing a book or a movie or a new song on a digital media, you should be able to push it out there. It's like, I'm open for business. This is what I have for sale. Anybody wants it? I've already given you all the information to push a button and schedule time with me and take my tour. Travel doesn't work at all like that. So we're trying to say, using the newer technologies, using some of the AI LLM capabilities, but if I could get it to where I had a huge pool of published offers, anything from a vase of flowers in the hotel you're going to insurance companies, to a flight, to a tour, to a restaurant, to a golf tee time, anything, I publish that out there. That's what LLM would be excellent at, is going and saying, you'd able to describe what kind of experience you want, and it's going to go around and look through all these offers and finds out, okay, with what we call relevancy-based scoring, to say, what's the thing that is best for Tony? And oh, by the way, when it comes together, even if it's putting several products together, now it's like, book it now. It's not that I have to bounce out and go call my travel agent or go call the tour operator directly. No, it's ready now. Put your money down. You got it. That is such a foreign thought to most of the business leadership and travel, to say, we have to catch up with we were a pioneer because we had an international connections, worldwide connections between airlines and hotels in the 1970s. Nobody else had that. But we have the legacy way of doing things from the mindset that was developed around all that technology. To say, now we got to leapfrog and get to all other digital retail that says, look, this is what I got. Here's my terms and conditions. Hit buy or not, or move on.
I mean,
So
it's great there's a model that people can follow that already exists out there. I guess what I want to know is like, so the listeners to this podcast, some of them, you know, for sure are CEOs of bigger corporations, but a lot are at SMB level. What can or should they do around this opportunity of open source? Like what moves can they make?
Well, right. Well, you're asking the right question in that their easiest path to business success is leveraging open source. So whether that's in the systems they buy, well, even I talked about, even we put out these, you put in your terms and conditions in an offer, that's rules. There's long-term open source and relatively cheap and affordable things. So it's also keeping the mindset that as I build this, I want to leverage as much open source as possible. I've run into some startups already that are already putting that with code generation from open source. So they're picking up the pieces they can and then using the newer AI models and everything to actually only have half the staff they normally would have had to, because they actually using some other AI capabilities to generate code. The problem still comes down that if you want to operate in travel, there's still all these big players that are so damn hard to talk to. So I do talk to a lot of startups that contact Open Travel and say, can I get a message for this? Can I go ahead and contact, Aer Lingus or, somebody else? Just give me the message. Like, no, I'm not a clearinghouse for everybody's oddball messages. Unfortunately not. Here's the standard set of messages that unfortunately everybody has taken and modified the crap out of. That's still making it very difficult. But what you can do is help things like Open Travel to say, and get a larger voice to say, we're actually sick and tired of this. And we'd like you to all to start actually sticking to the standards and make more of the standards. We're actually advocating getting together, and whether this is startups or not, actually creating an open source, meaning a functional solution that does open offer management. So that just says how you publish your tour. That should all be open source. To just say, and it should be less than $1,000 a you, a tour operator, to publish your portfolio out there. And then that would greatly expand the market for everybody, because it'd be a hell of a lot more things to sell. But how you get that offer into a pool in the cloud and how you extract it is not a competitive advantage for anyone. So what we're trying to get everybody's heads around, so you hit on a really key area, the tour operators, restaurants, and others. To back up and give you some numbers of the market opportunity out that, some of the numbers are, I'm going to go back to 2019 because that's before COVID and that's when a lot of the peaks were. So in the United States alone, travel-related spend by the U.S. Department of Commerce was $1.1 trillion in 2019. You want to guess how much of that went for the major distribution channels you're thinking of, like Expedia and the GDSs? Less than 20%.
There you go. Big opportunity.
So that's a lot of money left on unmanaged travel out there. And the barrier is the complexity. And so we need the startups as much as anybody else to put their voice to this and everything, saying, I could be making a ton of money. How do we get together and beginning to start chip away for this? And your industry, tour operators, is probably one of the more shiny objects to go after first, because you probably know better than I do, probably the numbers, but working with the Octo team and others, there's like Fair Harbor and these other companies, many of which have been picked up by Booking.com, but they're just providing a basic web service for people now so they get the credit card transactions to book it. I go diving a lot. I was just diving yesterday. Saw a hammerhead, by the way.
Well done.
But I've even talked to some of the dive shops and everything, say how to use this and get a little detail. But it's still, you find it and then you got to separately go to the dive website and everything and book it. Well, working with Booking.com or working with startups, we could quickly get to the tour operators. Here's a low-cost way to publish your stuff. I don't have to wait till all the airlines agree. I don't have to wait till all the hotels agree. It's groups like Octo and everything that could pull some things together and say, just make it super easy and super cheap for me to shop for things to do.
Very good, very good.
And that's
Stu,
probably where we get some momentum.
Brilliant. We've got 60 seconds left. If people have liked what they've heard today, they want to know more about Open Travel Alliance, how do they get in contact with you? What should they do?
Best thing, just go to opentravel.org. There's pages there. We have a lot of this stuff on the webpage. And even if you want to be about this discussion group to figure out how these offers and orders work, I put in a form for that saying, I'd like to join the work group and talk about it.
Perfect, perfect. People, if you are interested in this open source opportunity, which is huge as Stu has laid out to us and better for us all, please get in touch with the organization. Stu, thanks very much for your time today. I hope you see many more hammerheads in the future.
Thank you. Nice talking to you, Tony.
Beautiful. Thanks, everyone. That's it for another show on the Everything AI and Travel podcast. If you enjoyed this one, please hit subscribe where you're listening to it, and we'll be back with another one very shortly. Have a good day.
AI, in the travel, here we go. Got that AI on the low, taking flights to and fro.